My mother called the caterer at 9:47 on a Tuesday morning to cancel my graduation party, and I was sitting 3 feet away from the speakerphone when she did it. That is how this story begins. Not with a shout. Not with a door slamming. It begins with a phone ringing in a quiet back office that smelled like garlic and fresh bread. And with me choosing not to say a single word while my mother told a stranger that her son did not want to celebrate anymore. But to understand why I stayed silent, I need to take you back to the beginning. My name is Liam Brooks. I am 31 years old. I just completed my surgical residency match at one of the top teaching hospitals in the state, which means in about 6 weeks I will officially be a licensed physician. Most people who meet me assume I come from money because I carry myself that way. Measured, unhurried, comfortable in rooms where other people are anxious. What they do not know is that I paid for every single year of medical school by working overnight shifts in a hospital supply room, and that the reason I had to do that is because someone stole the money that was supposed to cover it. I did not know that part yet, on the morning my mother made that phone call. What I did know, sitting in that back office across from Marcus Webb, the owner of Webb's Catering and Events, was that I had been waiting for exactly this moment for 7 months. Marcus is a large, quiet man with a gray beard and the kind of patience you only develop after 20 years of managing other people's worst days. I had hired him in October to handle the food and service for my graduation celebration. 60 guests, Grand Oak Estate, the kind of evening I had been building toward since I was 19 years old. We had gone over the menu together 3 times. I had paid the full deposit, and I had given him one specific instruction. If anyone calls to make changes on my behalf, put them on speaker. His phone rang at 9:47. He glanced at the screen, then at me. I gave him a small nod. He answered, set the phone face up on the desk between us, and leaned back. Marcus, this is Martha Brooks. Her voice was bright, the way it always gets when she is performing for someone she has just met. I am Liam's mother. I am so sorry to bother you on short notice, but Liam asked me to call on his behalf. He has decided he does not want to go forward with the event. He is embarrassed about the cost, honestly, and he feels like the whole thing is too much for a school that is not even top tier. He said to tell you he understands about the deposit. The office was very quiet. I could hear the ventilation fan above the walk-in cooler. I could hear the faint sound of a prep cook doing something with a knife in the kitchen down the hall. Marcus looked at me across the desk with an expression that gave away nothing. I picked up my coffee cup. I took a slow sip. The coffee had gone slightly cold, and it tasted bitter in a way that had nothing to do with the beans. My mother kept talking. She added that my father agreed with the decision, that the family thought it was more dignified to keep things quiet, and that she hoped Marcus could process the cancellation by end of business. Her voice had that particular quality it gets when she thinks she has already won something. Marcus cleared his throat. Mrs. Brooks, he said, I appreciate the call. I do want to let you know, though, that the 48-hour cancellation window closed on Sunday, so the contract terms would not allow for a refund at this point. He paused. Also, I should mention that Liam is currently sitting across from me. The silence from the other end of the line lasted exactly 5 seconds. I counted them. When my mother spoke again, her voice had changed. The brightness was gone. What replaced it was something thin and defensive, like paper stretched over wire. She said that she and my father simply wanted to protect me from the embarrassment of throwing a party that reflected poorly on the family. She said that $9,200 was an extravagant amount for a celebration that, in her words, most people would not find impressive anyway. I set down my coffee cup very carefully, because I knew that if my hands moved too fast in that moment, something would shift in my face, and I did not want anything to shift. I leaned toward the phone. Go ahead, Mom, I said. Tell Marcus what you really think of my graduation. Another silence. Longer this time. Liam, she said, you need to come home so we can talk about this like adults. I will not be doing that, I said. But I appreciate the call. I reached over and ended it. Marcus looked at me for a moment. Then he said, the event is still on for Saturday, I take it. It is, I said, and I want to add 2 tables. I drove out of that parking lot and into a gray November morning, and I kept my hands steady on the wheel the whole way, and I let myself feel exactly one thing. The particular cold satisfaction of a man who has been waiting a very long time for confirmation of something he already knew. The drive from Marcus's catering office to Grand Oak Estate takes about 22 minutes if you go the back way along the river road. I went the back way. I needed the time. I have a habit, when I am processing something difficult, of pulling it apart methodically, the way you would approach a complex diagnosis. You identify the presenting symptoms. You trace them back to their origin. You do not allow yourself to be distracted by the loudest complaint when the real problem is quieter and deeper. My mentor in my second year of medical school, a professor named Dr. Patricia Owens, noticed this tendency early. She pulled me aside after a case presentation once and said, "Liam, I see you in these sessions. You are always the calmest one in the room. That is a gift." She paused, and then she added something I did not fully understand at the time. "Just make sure you are not calm because you have learned to expect disappointment." I thought about that on the river road. I thought about it for the first time in years. Here is what I need you to understand about my family and about the shape of my childhood so that the rest of this story makes sense. My sister Chloe is 3 years older than me. She is currently a senior financial analyst at a regional bank, and she has always been, in my parents' eyes, the one who counted. This is not something they ever said out loud. They did not need to. It lived in the small decisions, the offhand comments, the allocation of attention in a room. When Chloe got into a good undergraduate program, my father took her out to dinner at the best steakhouse in town. When I got into medical school, actual medical school, with a full academic record and a research fellowship, my mother listened to me tell her the news over the phone and then said, "That is nice, honey. Oh, by the way, your sister just got promoted." I remember standing in the hallway of my studio apartment after that call, holding the phone against my chest, and telling myself that it did not matter, that I was 30 years old and I did not need my mother to throw a parade, that the work was the point, not the recognition. I told myself that for a long time. The engagement party was the moment I stopped telling myself that. 2 years ago, Chloe got engaged to a man named Derek, and my parents threw them a party that cost $25,000. I know the number because my father mentioned it proudly at the event itself, to several different people, in a tone of voice that made clear he considered it an investment in the family's reputation. I sat at that party with a smile on my face and a drink in my hand, and I calculated, quietly, the arithmetic of what I had been given versus what I had been denied. 3 months after that party, I started planning my own celebration. I did it the only way I knew how, which was to pay for it myself. I worked 4 extra overnight shifts a month for 6 months. I set aside the money carefully. I hired Marcus. I booked Grand Oak Estate for the first Saturday in November, which would be 10 days after my residency match was confirmed. And I sent invitations to 60 people, including my parents and my sister. I want to be honest about this because I think it matters. I sent those invitations with some part of me still hoping. That is the truth, and it is not a comfortable one. Even after 31 years of being the background character in my own family story, some residual piece of me believed that maybe this achievement, a medical degree, a surgical residency match, the kind of thing that does not happen without a decade of brutal work, would be the thing that finally made them show up differently. Dr. Owens was right about me. I had learned to expect disappointment, but I had not learned to stop hoping. What I had also done, because I am who I am, was take out a small insurance policy. About 2 weeks before the party, I noticed something on the family group chat. Chloe had accidentally sent a text to the wrong thread. It was meant for her friend group, and it described the plan in casual, breezy language. "Mom already called to cancel Liam's thing," she said. "We are going to tell him we are sick. He will get over it. He always does." I read that message 3 times. Then I forwarded it to my personal email, took a screenshot, and saved it in a folder I had already labeled, for reasons I could not quite articulate at the time, documentation. After that, I made a second set of invitations. 3 of them addressed specifically to my mother, my father, and my sister. The venue on those invitations read, Waterfront Grand Hotel, Ballroom B, 7 p.m. The actual party was at Grand Oak Estate, which is 12 miles in the opposite direction. I did not tell anyone I had done this. Not even Sarah. Sarah Nguyen has been with me for 4 years. She is a pediatric nurse practitioner. She is the steadiest person I have ever known, and she has watched my family treat me as an afterthought for every one of those 4 years with a quiet, controlled fury that she mostly keeps to herself out of respect for what she knows is my decision to handle things my own way. She once told me that watching my mother talk to me at Christmas was like watching someone pat a dog on the head while looking over its shoulder for the real pet. I laughed at the time. I did not correct her. I pulled into the Grand Oak parking lot, turned off the engine, and sat for a moment in the leather seat of my car with the November light coming through the windshield. The estate was already busy. I could see the catering vans in the service lane, and someone carrying an arrangement of deep green eucalyptus branches toward the main entrance. The air outside would be cold and clean. I thought about Dr. Owens saying, "Just make sure you are not calm because you have learned to expect disappointment." I thought about what my mother had just tried to do with 9 minutes and a phone call. And I thought about the thing I did not know yet, the thing that was buried inside a trust document in a law office across town, waiting for the right moment to come to light. I did not know about that yet, but what I knew was enough to get me through Saturday. I got out of the car, buttoned my jacket against the cold, and went to work. Grand Oak Estate on a November evening looks like something out of a different century. The main building is a converted 1920s manor house with stone walls and tall windows, and when the interior lights come on at dusk and the candles are lit on the tables inside, the whole place glows warm amber against the dark sky. The grounds crew had raked the last of the leaves from the long front drive, and someone had strung small white lights through the oak trees that line the path from the parking area to the main entrance. The air smelled of wood smoke, and the faint sweetness of the caramel apple station Marcus had set up in the foyer. I stood at the entrance at 6:45 and watched my guests arrive, and I felt something that I had not allowed myself to feel in a very long time. I felt proud. Not the defensive, earned despite everything pride I had carried through medical school like a shield. Something simpler. Something that just existed on its own terms, without needing to justify itself to anyone. Dr. Eris Chun arrived early, the way he always does. He is 62 years old, and he has the bearing of a man who has spent 40 years being the most competent person in any given room without needing to announce it. He was my second-year surgical theory professor and then my research mentor and then, over time, something closer to the advisor every young doctor needs and most do not find. He shook my hand, looked at the room and said, "You built this yourself, didn't you?" It was not a question. "Every dollar," I said. He nodded once, the way he does when something confirms what he already knew, and went to find a drink. Sarah found me at 7:15. She was wearing a dark blue dress and her hair was down, which she rarely does, and when she put her arms around me she held on for a moment longer than usual. She had not asked me about the fake invitations. I had told her about them the night before, quietly, in the kitchen of our apartment, and she had looked at me for a long moment and then said, "Okay." That single word contained everything. She understood. She did not need to debate it. The room filled up. 61 people in the end because one colleague brought his wife. There were residents I had trained alongside, professors from my program, a few close friends from college who had watched me grind through this decade, and my grandfather's old friend from his army days, a retired colonel named Peterson who had known me since I was 8 years old and who now gripped my shoulder and said, "Your grandfather would be busting his buttons tonight, son." My grandfather, Thomas Brooks. I will come back to him. At 8 o'clock, Marcus dimmed the lights slightly, and Dr. Chun stood up with a glass of wine and spoke for about 4 minutes. He did not use notes. He talked about the first time he saw me present a case, and how I had been wrong about the diagnosis but right about every single step of the reasoning, and how that combination, intellectual honesty plus rigorous process, was rarer than most people knew and worth more than a correct guess. He said that the medical community was getting a physician who would remain calm when everyone else was losing their footing. He raised his glass. 61 people raised theirs. I looked around that room at those faces, at the amber light and the eucalyptus and the untouched chairs at the 2 tables I had held back from the seating chart, and I felt the thing I had been building toward for 10 years settle into place like the last bone of a clean surgical repair. My phone vibrated in my jacket pocket. I already knew what it would be. I had been waiting for it since roughly 7:20, which was when I estimated the fake invitations recipients would arrive at the Waterfront Grand Hotel and find ballroom be empty, dark, and booked for a corporate conference that had nothing to do with anyone named Brooks. The photo my father had sent showed the three of them, my mother in her good coat, my father in his blazer, my sister in the kind of dress you wear when you intend to be seen somewhere nice, standing in the marble lobby of the Waterfront Hotel. My mother had her phone raised. The message beneath the photo said, "Where is everyone? This does not look right." I turned my phone face down on the table. 14 minutes later, the text from my mother was sharper. "Liam, this is not funny. We are at the address on your invitation and there is nothing here. Are you deliberately doing this?" I did not respond. I danced with Sarah. I toasted with Dr. Chun. I talked for 20 minutes with 3 of my classmates about the hospital assignments we had drawn, and I laughed at something one of them said about the residency lottery, and I ate the best catered food Marcus had ever prepared in my presence. At 9:08, the text stopped. At 9:14, the phone showed 3 figures walking toward the Grand Oak Estate entrance in a photo my father had taken through the windshield of his car. He had figured it out. Of course he had. It was not that difficult to figure out. That was not the point. The point was the 12 miles. The 47 minutes in that hotel lobby. The particular sensation of standing somewhere and realizing, in real time, that you had been deliberately excluded. I wanted them to know what that felt like. I put my phone back in my pocket, finished my champagne, and went to find the estate manager to let him know that there might be some uninvited guests at the front gate in about 10 minutes. Then I went to say something to my grandfather's friend Peterson, because it had been 5 years and he deserved more than a handshake. The party was still going strong. The lights were still warm. The music was still low and easy in the background. And somewhere across town, in the marble lobby of a hotel that had nothing to do with any of this, the performance my mother had been rehearsing in her head, the dignified arrival, the gracious acknowledgement, the image of herself as the woman who shaped a doctor, was dissolving into an empty ballroom. Some things are worth the cost of an extra 2 tables. I heard them before I saw them. My mother's voice carries in a particular way when she is performing distress for an audience. There is a pitch she uses, not quite a shout, not quite a cry, that is calibrated specifically for the moment when she wants witnesses. I heard that pitch coming from the direction of the front gate while I was standing near the bar talking to Peterson, and I set down my glass with the practiced calm of a man who has been waiting for exactly this. The estate's head of security, a former sheriff's deputy named Gerald, had already intercepted them at the gate. Gerald is a large man with a short gray haircut and the unhurried authority of someone who has handled far louder situations than this one. He was standing very still and speaking very quietly, which meant he was doing his job correctly. I walked to the entrance alone. My mother was standing with her arms crossed, her face arranged into an expression of wounded authority, the look of a woman who believes that the mere fact of her presence should be sufficient to open any door. My father stood slightly behind her in the way he always does when she takes the lead. Not supportive exactly, more like a man who has decided years ago that forward motion is her department. My sister Chloe was off to the side, and she was not performing distress. She was looking at the gravel of the driveway, and her face was something I had not expected. It was pale. I stopped about 6 feet from them. My mother said, "Liam, tell this man to let us in. This is completely unreasonable and you know it." Her voice was steady but her jaw was tight. She was holding her good coat closed against the cold with both hands. I looked at her for a moment. I looked at my father. I looked at Chloe, who still would not meet my eyes. I said, "This party is for the people who supported me. You 3 do not qualify." My mother's expression shifted in that specific way it does when she encounters resistance she did not account for. A quick tightening around the eyes. A micro-movement of the jaw. "We are your family," she said. "You do not have the right to exclude your own family." "I booked this venue," I said. "I paid for this evening. I invited 60 people who have actually shown up for me. You 3 drove 12 miles in the wrong direction because you received a different invitation from everyone else, which should tell you something about where you stood in my planning. My father's face had gone red. He said something about respect and about the way children were supposed to treat their parents, and his voice had that climbing register that means he is about to get loud. I did not raise my voice at all. I said, "I would like you to leave now. You cannot just—" My mother started. "Gerald," I said, without turning around, "please make sure our guests inside are not disturbed." Gerald said, "Yes, sir," and moved slightly to close the gap in the gate. My mother made a sound that was not quite a word. My father said my name once, loudly, in the tone he used when I was 12 and had done something he disapproved of. I remember flinching at that tone when I was 12. I noticed, at 31, standing on the gravel outside a venue I had paid for with my own labor, that the sound of it meant nothing to me anymore. I turned to go back inside. Behind me, my mother said something. I did not catch all of it. I caught the words embarrassment and selfish, and after everything we have done for you, which is a sentence that has always functioned in my family as a conversational grenade rather than an actual accounting. I did not respond to it. I walked back through the entrance of Grand Oak Estate and into the warm light and the sound of people who were glad I existed, and the gate closed behind me. I shook one hand, then another. Someone put a glass in mine. Peterson said something that made me laugh. I stayed for another hour, and the laughter was real, and the warmth was real, and the evening ended well. But on the drive home, I thought about the eviction notice that had been taped to my apartment door 3 days ago, the one I had told no one about yet. The one that explained, in the cold bureaucratic language of property management, that a call had been received from the tenant of record. A call made with my full name, my unit number, and my social security number, requesting early lease termination. My social security number, which I had never given to anyone, except my parents, who had requested it when I was 17 to help file my financial aid forms. My mother had tried to cancel my party with a phone call. She had tried to erase my graduation from the calendar with a lie. But she had also, somewhere in the 48 hours before that party, used my identity to throw me out of my own apartment. That was not an emotional mistake. That was a federal crime. I got home at midnight and stood in the hallway of my building holding the eviction notice under the fluorescent light, reading it for the 3rd time. The document was a standard early termination notice from the building management office. It stated that on the previous Thursday, a phone call had been received from Liam Brooks, tenant of Unit 4F, requesting voluntary early termination of his lease. The caller had provided the unit number, the last 4 digits of the social security number on file, and the tenant's date of birth. Under the building's lease terms, such a request carried a 2-month penalty and required the tenant to vacate within 72 hours. I had not made that call. I had been at the hospital during the hours in question, which I could prove with 3 different sign-in logs and a colleague who had eaten lunch with me in the cafeteria. I had not called the building management office. I had not requested early lease termination. I had not known about any of this until I came home to find this paper taped above my door handle. Someone had called pretending to be me. Someone who knew my unit number. Someone who knew the last 4 digits of my social security number and my date of birth. There are not many people who hold all 3 of those things at once. I went inside, sat down at my kitchen table, and was still for about 2 minutes. I could hear the refrigerator. I could hear a car passing on the street below. I looked at the far wall where I had tacked up the match confirmation letter, the one that said in official university letterhead that I had been accepted into the surgical residency program. I looked at it for a while. Then I opened my laptop. I navigated to IC3.gov. If you are not familiar with it, IC3 stands for the Internet Crime Complaint Center. It is a partnership between the FBI and the National White Collar Crime Center, and it is where you go when you need to formally report identity-related federal crimes. Identity theft in the United States falls under Title 18 of the United States Code, Section 1028, which makes it a federal offense to knowingly use another person's identification documents or information to commit unlawful activity. Using someone's social security number and personal identifiers to fraudulently terminate a legal contract qualifies. I filled out the intake form slowly and carefully, the way I approach surgical documentation, with the understanding that what you write becomes the permanent record, and that the permanent record is the only version of events that matters in a formal proceeding. I entered my full legal name, my address, my contact information. I described the incident in factual language without adjectives. A call was placed on a specific date at an approximate time, using my identifying information, to my building management office, resulting in the fraudulent initiation of an early lease termination. I noted the specific data points the caller would have needed: unit number, last four of social security number, date of birth. I noted that I had not made this call and could demonstrate my whereabouts through hospital records. In the attachments section, I uploaded the eviction notice. I uploaded a copy of my hospital sign-in log for the day in question. I uploaded a screenshot of a text message my mother had sent me 3 weeks prior that contained the phrase, "Just making sure I have all your information right." A text I had found mildly odd at the time and had not deleted. I read through the entire submission once. Then I read it again. Before I hit submit, I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Underneath a folder of old lab reports, there was a folded piece of paper that had been there for 12 years. I unfolded it. It was a phone number, written in my grandfather's handwriting, Thomas Brooks, my father's father, the man who had raised my father and built whatever integrity the Brooks name had once possessed. He had pressed the paper into my hand at my high school graduation, when I was 18, and said in a low voice, "This is Eleanor Voss. She is a lawyer and she is good. You call her when you really need her, not before." I had never called her. I had moved that piece of paper through 4 apartments and 12 years without calling her. I looked at the number for a long moment. Then I looked at the IC3 submission on my screen, at the eviction notice in the attachments, at the hospital log, at the text message. I hit submit. The confirmation number came back immediately. A 12-digit reference code that I photographed with my phone and then copied into a new email draft I saved but did not send. The timestamp on the submission read 2:11 a.m. I sat back. The apartment was very quiet. Sarah was asleep in the next room, and I had not woken her because there are some things you need to process alone first. I thought about what Dr. Owens had said about being calm. I thought about my mother's voice on Marcus's speakerphone, bright and performative and completely assured of her own safety. I thought about how people who have never faced consequences develop a very specific kind of carelessness. I picked up the piece of paper with Eleanor Voss's phone number. I set it on the kitchen table where I would see it in the morning. Then I went to bed, and for the first time in a week, I slept without interruption. Eleanor Voss's office was on the 14th floor of a building downtown that smelled like old paper and good wood polish, and her assistant, a young man who moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned never to keep Eleanor Voss waiting, led me into a corner office overlooking the river at exactly 10 a.m. on a Wednesday morning. Eleanor herself was not what I expected, which is something I should have anticipated given that my grandfather had been a man who understood the value of underestimation. She was 63 years old, compact, with white hair cut short and eyes that assessed you in the first 5 seconds and did not need to reassess. She was wearing a gray blazer and no jewelry except for small silver earrings, and she looked at me the way a physician looks at a patient who has come in later than they should have. "I wondered when I would hear from you," she said. I sat down in the chair across from her desk. The chair was firm leather, the kind designed to keep you focused rather than comfortable. Through the window behind her, the river was flat and gray under November clouds. "You knew I would call eventually?" I said. "Your grandfather told me about you every year until he passed," she said. "He said you were the kind of person who handles things alone until you cannot anymore, and then you handle them correctly." She folded her hands on the desk. "What happened?" I told her. All of it, the speakerphone call, the fake invitations, the eviction notice, the IC3 filing. She listened without interrupting, which is rarer than it sounds in a person of her experience. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she stood up and went to a gray filing cabinet in the corner of the room. She opened the second drawer, removed a thick folder, and set it on the desk between us. Your grandfather established a testamentary trust for you in 2009, she said. The principal was $65,000, designated specifically for your post-secondary education. Under the terms of the trust, the funds were to be held in a restricted account and disbursed only for qualifying educational expenses. She opened the folder and turned it so I could read the top page. Your parents were named as co-trustees because you were a minor at the time of establishment. I looked at the document. My name was on it, the account number, the $65,000 principal. I have been monitoring this trust, Eleanor said, because that is what your grandfather paid me to do, and I want to tell you what I found. She turned to a different page in the folder. It showed a series of disbursement records, dates, amounts, account numbers. The amounts were not large individually. $3,000 here, $8,000 there. One disbursement of $14,000 in a single transaction in 2014. Over the course of 12 years, Eleanor said, your parents withdrew the full principal plus accrued interest from this account. The current total of what was removed comes to $112,000. I looked at the page. I looked at the disbursement dates. The first one was in 2011, which was the year before I started college. The last was in 2019, which was my third year of medical school, the year I took on the most overtime shifts, the year I came closest to dropping out because I could not see how the numbers were ever going to work. These disbursements were authorized with co-trustee signatures, Eleanor said. Some of those signatures appear on documents that also bear your signature as the primary beneficiary. You would have been between 16 and 21 at the time those documents were signed. I sat very still. I did not sign those documents, I said. I know, she said. Your grandfather suspected. He did not have proof during his lifetime, and he did not want to fracture the family without certainty. She looked at me steadily. We have certainty now. Between the trust disbursement records, the signature analysis I had done 2 years ago on a preliminary basis, and the identity theft complaint you filed this week, we have the foundation for a civil suit on 3 separate grounds: breach of fiduciary duty, forgery, and wire fraud. The wire fraud charge is federal, because the disbursements were processed through an interstate banking network. I thought about all the overnight shifts, all the cups of vending machine coffee at 3 a.m. in a supply corridor, all the loan statements I had opened with that particular dread that comes from knowing the number before you see it. I thought about my mother's voice on Marcus's speakerphone, telling a stranger that I was embarrassed by the cost of my own celebration. They had taken $112,000 from an account my grandfather built for me. They had used my money to fund my sister's graduate degree and their own mortgage payments. And then, for 31 years, they had managed to make me feel like the one who did not measure up. Eleanor placed the folder squarely on the desk between us. Liam, she said, your parents did not just steal your party. They stole your medical school. Every year you worked double shifts to pay loans. That money should have been yours. Now let me show you how we take it back. I looked at the folder. I looked at her. What do I need to do? I said. For now, she said. You go home. You write everything down. And you leave the rest to me. I spent 3 nights writing the document. I did it at the kitchen table of my friend Daniel's apartment, where I was staying after the building management situation made my own place complicated. Daniel is an emergency medicine resident, a man of few words and practical hospitality, who had said, of course, when I called and had asked no questions since. He went to bed early because his shift started at 5, and so from about 10 o'clock each night until the small hours, the apartment was mine. I wrote the document in plain language in 12-point Times New Roman, with numbered sections and labeled exhibits. I called it what it was, an account of events supported by documentation. I included the text message from Chloe, screenshot printed and labeled Exhibit A. I included the IC3 confirmation number and a summary of the identity theft complaint, labeled Exhibit B. I included copies of the disbursement records Eleanor had provided, labeled Exhibits C through F. I included the eviction notice. I included a 1-page timeline beginning in 2009, when the trust was established and running to the present. The document was 18 pages, including exhibits. On the fourth morning, I read through it one more time. I was looking for anything that was not factual, any place where I had let emotion drive the language rather than the evidence. There was one paragraph in the second section that I rewrote 3 times before it met the standard. The rest held. I thought, sitting there at Daniel's kitchen table with the document on the screen in front of me, about Dr. Patricia Owens telling me in my first year of medical school to never let the presenting complaint distract me from the underlying pathology. The presenting complaint in my family had always been favoritism, the ordinary, painful, dinner-table version that millions of second children know. But the underlying pathology was financial crime. The favoritism was the symptom. The crime was the disease. I also thought about something else. There is a moment in any complex procedure, surgical or otherwise, where you have done all the preparation you can do, and the only thing left is to execute. In that moment, a good surgeon does not hesitate, and does not second-guess, and does not wonder what the room thinks of their technique. They proceed. The outcome is not guaranteed, but the process is sound, and the process is the only thing you control. I had a sound process. I saved the document as a PDF. I compiled the contact information for 12 family members, aunts, uncles, cousins, my grandfather's surviving friends, including Colonel Peterson, and I added to that list my Uncle Robert, my father's brother, a man I had always respected for the quiet independence he kept from the rest of the family's dynamics. I also included Eleanor Voss in the email, not because she needed it but because I wanted the family to know that a lawyer was already involved. I addressed the email with a simple subject line, "A record of events. Please read." I went through the body of the email once more. It was 3 paragraphs. It explained what the attached document contained and why I was sharing it. It did not ask for anything. It did not request a response. It simply stated that I believed the family had a right to know the facts. Sarah appeared in the doorway of the kitchen in her coat, on her way to an early shift. She looked at the screen and then at me. We had talked about this the night before. All of it, the trust, Eleanor, the plan, and she had listened the way she always does, fully and without interruption, and at the end she had said, "You are the most patient man I have ever met." I mean that as a compliment and a slight concern. I had kissed her on the forehead and told her I was almost done being patient. She came over now and read the subject line. "Today?" she said. "Today," I said. She squeezed my shoulder once. Then she went to work. I hit send at 8:43 in the morning. Then I closed the laptop, made coffee, and waited. My mother called the family meeting for the following Sunday afternoon. I know this because Uncle Robert texted me after he received her invitation, which described the gathering as an opportunity to address some recent misunderstandings as a family, with love and open minds. Robert's text said simply, "I'll be there. You should stay outside until I signal you." I knew what my mother intended. She was going to stand in front of the assembled family with her composure intact and her narrative prepared, and she was going to perform grief and confusion well enough to make the document I had sent look like the product of a troubled young man attacking his own parents. She had done a version of this my entire childhood, the art of making herself the reasonable party by being the first to call for calm. What she did not know was that Uncle Robert had called me on Thursday. He had read the document twice. He had then called Eleanor Voss directly, using the contact information in the email, and spent 45 minutes on the phone with her. And then he had spent another 30 minutes on the phone with my grandfather's surviving attorney, confirming the trust records independently. He told me he was angrier than he had been in 30 years. He told me to trust him. I parked 2 blocks from my grandfather's old house, where my parents had been living since his passing, and sat in the car with the engine running for warmth. The November afternoon light was thin and silver. I could see the top of the oak tree in the backyard over the roofline. Robert texted me at 3:22. "Everyone is here. She's starting. Stay put." I stayed put. Inside that house, I learned later from Robert and from 2 other relatives who contacted me afterward. My mother opened the meeting by describing herself as a victim. She said that Liam had always been sensitive, that the document he had sent was a distortion of family history, and that no one had taken anything from anyone. The trust funds had been managed in the family's best interest, as was their right as trustees. My father sat beside her and nodded. Chloe sat across the room and looked at her hands. My mother was about 6 minutes into her presentation when Uncle Robert stood up. He is a quiet man in most circumstances. He spent 20 years as a civil engineer, and he approaches problems the way engineers do, with documentation and a low tolerance for imprecision. He stood up and he said, "Before we go any further, I want to read something." He pulled out his phone. He had screenshotted Chloe's accidental text message from the group chat, the one that said Mom already called to cancel Liam's thing. "We are going to tell him we are sick." He read it aloud, slowly, in the flat voice of a man reading a specification document. The room went quiet. Chloe looked up from her hands. My mother's jaw tightened. My father shifted in his chair. Robert said, "This is from Chloe's own message, sent to the wrong chat thread 2 weeks ago. Now I want to ask directly. Was the plan always to cancel Liam's party and not attend? And did you coordinate that as a family?" No one answered. Robert set his phone on the coffee table, face up, in the center of the room. Then Ong Thomas spoke. My grandfather had passed 4 years ago, but his voice was in that room through the man who had known him longest. Colonel Peterson, who had driven 40 minutes to be present because Robert had called him and told him what was in the document, stood up from the chair in the corner where he had been sitting so quietly that several people had apparently not noticed him. He was 81 years old, and he stood with the posture of a man 20 years younger. He said, "Thomas Brooks built a trust for his grandson because he believed in that boy and he wanted his future to be protected. I knew Thomas for 53 years. He would not recognize what is being described in this room as family stewardship. He would call it what it is." He sat back down. My mother said something. I was told it was something about intentions and love and the complexity of family finances, but her voice had changed. The performance calibration was off. Under pressure, when the audience has already seen the evidence, the performance always breaks down. My father said nothing at all. Chloe started to cry. Not performing distress crying. The other kind. The kind that comes from recognizing something about yourself that you cannot unrecognize. My grandfather's house, his chairs, his fireplace, his walls. The room where he had sat for 30 years as the moral center of the Brooks family, held none of the warmth it had held in his lifetime. Felt bare and cold and very accurate. Robert texted me at 3:58. "Come to the side door. Your grandfather's study. Just you and me for now." I walked through the side yard in the gray November afternoon, let myself in through the door that had always been unlocked, and sat across from my uncle in 2 chairs that still smelled faintly of my grandfather's pipe tobacco. Robert looked at me steadily. "Your grandfather knew," he said. "Not everything, but he knew something was wrong. That is why he left you Eleanor's number." I nodded. "He should have acted sooner," Robert said. "I should have looked harder. That is on both of us." He paused. "Eleanor is filing Monday morning." "I know," I said. "Your parents are going to fight it." "Let them," I said. He looked at me for another moment. Then he said, "You are going to be all right, Liam." It was a simple sentence. It did not contain anything that required a response. I knew it was true in the way you know things that have already happened, that are already settled, that only need the rest of the world to catch up. "I know," I said again. Eleanor filed on a Monday. The civil complaint named my parents as defendants on 3 counts: breach of fiduciary duty, civil fraud, and misappropriation of trust assets totaling $112,000 plus interest. She filed it in the county where the trust had been established, which was also the county where my grandfather had lived and where his name still carried the weight of a man who had spent 40 years building things in that community. Separately, the IC3 filing had been routed to the local FBI field office, which contacted me on the Tuesday following the family meeting. The agent I spoke with, a woman named Carver, measured and direct, told me that the identity theft complaint was under active review, that the building management company had confirmed receiving a fraudulent call, and that they were requesting my parents' phone records as part of the preliminary investigation. She said I would hear from them again. She said I should continue to document everything. I thanked her and went back to work. The hospital HR director called me on Wednesday morning. Her name was Sandra Park, and she had the voice of someone who has been managing difficult situations for a long time. She told me that the department had received an anonymous contact the previous week alleging that a residency candidate had demonstrated erratic behavior and possible psychological instability. She told me that, as a matter of standard protocol, the allegation had been reviewed. She also told me that after reviewing my complete file, academic record, research record, faculty evaluations, and the recommendation letter from Dr. Arischin, which she described as one of the strongest her office had received in 7 years, the allegation had been dismissed entirely, and my residency placement was confirmed and unchanged. "I wanted you to hear it directly," she said. "Your record speaks for itself." "Thank you," I said. I was sitting in the break room at the hospital, in a chair by the window watching the parking lot below. The morning was clear and cold. "I appreciate you calling." Chloe came to see me on a Thursday afternoon, 12 days after the family meeting. She arrived at Daniel's apartment building and texted me from the lobby. I went down. We stood in the lobby because I did not invite her up, and she did not ask me to. She was wearing a coat I had not seen before, and she looked like she had not slept well in 2 weeks, and when she saw me she did not arrange her face into anything. She just looked at me directly, which was more than I had been given from her in years. She said she had transferred $65,000 into my account that morning. The original trust principal. She said she understood that it did not cover the full amount, but that it was what she could do immediately, and that she would do more over time, and that she was not asking me to forgive her. She was asking me to take the money because it was mine. I had checked my account before coming down. The transfer had posted. I looked at her for a moment. She was my sister. She had sat in that kitchen 2 weeks ago and looked at her hands while the room fell apart around our parents, and she had cried the real kind of crying, and I believed that what she felt was genuine. I believed she understood what she had been part of. I also knew that understanding something and having earned forgiveness are 2 very different positions. "I received the transfer," I said. "Thank you." She nodded. "Liam," she said. "I am sorry." "I know you are," I said. I went back upstairs. I sat at Daniel's kitchen table and opened my bank account on my phone and looked at the number for a long time. For 12 years I had done the math of what was missing, the gap between what I had and what the education cost, the gap that sent me into overnight shifts and loan offices and years of the particular anxiety that comes from never having a financial margin. That gap had a number, and the number was no longer a gap. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was something quieter. The specific piece of a ledger that has been corrected. Then I called Eleanor to tell her about Chloe's transfer, and asked how it affected the civil filing. She said it reduced the damages sought but did not affect the conduct charges, which proceeded on their own terms. I told her to proceed. The graduation ceremony was held on a Friday morning in December, in a university auditorium that seated 2,000 people and smelled of the particular mixture of polished wood and anxiety that seems to live permanently in rooms where formal things happen. I wore the gown. I walked across the stage. The dean of the medical school shook my hand and said my full name into the microphone. Dr. Liam Brooks, and somewhere in the middle rows, Ong Thomas, my grandfather, heard it through Colonel Peterson, who leaned over and repeated it into the old man's better ear. My grandfather had passed 4 years ago. Peterson told me afterward that he had whispered the name anyway, into the empty space in the row where he imagined Thomas would have sat. I did not find this strange. I found it right. Sarah was in the front section with Dr. Chun and a dozen colleagues. She had a small flag she had threatened to wave and then, when the moment came, tucked discreetly under her arm and only raised slightly. I saw it. I smiled. She knew I saw it. I found out later from Uncle Robert that my parents had been present somewhere in the building. Not inside the ceremony, they had not been given tickets, and the auditorium was allocated strictly. But apparently they had been in the lobby of the adjacent building, visible through the glass corridor that connects to the main hall. Robert did not tell me this to be cruel. He told me because he thought I deserved to know the full picture. I did not go looking for them. I had nothing to say that had not already been documented and filed. After the ceremony, Dr. Chun took a group of us to dinner at a restaurant where the lighting was good and the wine list was serious, and he gave a short speech about the responsibility of technical excellence to actual human beings, and everyone at the table listened because when Eris Chun talks about medicine, it is worth stopping to hear. Sarah held my hand under the table for most of dinner. I ate well. The evening was long and easy. I drove home to my new apartment, 8th floor, a building I had chosen because of the windows, which face east and catch the morning light before I leave for the hospital, and I stood on the small balcony in my dress shirt with a glass of water, looking at the city below, and I let myself be still. This is what no one tells you about winning. There is no fanfare inside it. There is no surge of the particular triumph you imagined when you were in the middle of the worst part. What there is, instead, is a quietness, a sense of weight released. You have been carrying something for a very long time, and then one day you put it down, and the absence of the weight is not an absence of feeling. It is a presence, a very specific kind of lightness that is different from happiness and more durable than relief. I stood on that balcony for a long time. In the weeks that followed, the legal process moved the way legal processes do. Steadily, without drama, with the patience of a system designed to outlast the emotions of the people inside it. The civil filing proceeded. My parents retained an attorney and filed a response contesting the fraud claims, which Eleanor had anticipated. The pretrial process began. The FBI investigation into the identity theft was ongoing as of the time I am telling you this. What I can tell you has already resolved. The building management company formally rescinded the fraudulent eviction notice, acknowledged the identity theft complaint in writing, and returned my deposit in full. My tenancy at my new apartment began on my own terms, with my own signature, verified in person. The identity theft charge remains under federal review, and my parents' phone records have been subpoenaed. My residency began on the first Monday of January. I was assigned to the surgical floor of a teaching hospital 20 minutes from my apartment, under a supervising physician who communicates entirely through precise language and raised expectations, which suits me exactly. On my third day, I managed a pre-op consultation that 2 senior residents had struggled with, and my supervisor said, in front of the room, that my instincts were sound. I noted the comment. I did not need it, but I noted it. My parents lost the house 4 months after the graduation. The mortgage default they had been managing by not managing became unmanageable once the family financial network, the informal system of loans and favors and averted eyes that had kept them stable for years, stopped functioning after the family meeting. Uncle Robert did not offer to help. No one did. I did not feel grief about this. I did not feel satisfaction. I felt the particular absence of feeling that comes when a long-standing threat becomes simply a fact. Chloe and I do not speak regularly. That may change. I hold the door open, not out of hope, but out of fairness. What she does with it is her own work to do. Sarah and I moved into the 8th floor apartment together in February. She has a wall of plants in the kitchen that is encroaching on my coffee setup territory, and we are in ongoing negotiation about this, and I am losing. I am, in every meaningful sense, at the beginning of something. Here is what I want to leave you with, because this story is not only mine. If you have spent years trying to earn recognition from people who have already decided not to give it, I want you to hear this clearly. The problem is not your performance. It never was. Some people have decided in advance what you are worth to them, and no achievement will revise that number, because the number was never about your achievements. It was about their needs. The most dangerous thing you can do in that situation is keep performing. Keep trying. Keep showing up with something in your hands, hoping that this time the door will open. The most powerful thing you can do is stop. Not in anger, not in bitterness, but in the calm, clear recognition that the account has been examined, the books have been found fraudulent, and you are no longer obligated to fund a ledger that was never in your name. Build your own ledger. Document everything. Find the Eleanor Vosses in your life, the people who have been waiting with information you need, who only needed you to finally call. And when the door closes behind you for the last time, do not look back at it. You have surgery in the morning.